Okay, good evening and welcome to the latest version of Building the Scottish State with Dr. Mark McNaught. And I have the great pleasure, of welcoming Lesley Riddoch, who needs no introduction, prolific columnist, writer, and maker of films about Nordic countries. So first of all, thank you so much for being with us this evening, Lesley.
Absolutely, delighted, actually chuffed. Yes.
Excellent. So let's get on first to talk a little bit about the Nordic model. And I have to confess that I haven't followed a lot of your writings about it. I've seen some articles and stuff, but tell us a little bit more about how you kind of discovered the Nordic countries and you began to appreciate to what degree Scotland could emulate that in becoming independent, and why it is a good thing, or why it would be a positive thing to emulate these models.
Well, I mean, first of all, just look at any indicator you want. I mean, any. Mm-hmm. Happiness, health, longevity, education, literacy, the PISA charts, anything that you care to mention that measures any aspect of what it is to be a kind of good country. Mm-hmm. And you find the Nordics tediously top of them. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're never out of them. And if that doesn't, build up some curiosity about what they're doing right, then what are we doing? It strikes me that in general, Scotland has become accustomed as kind of as countries that have had the stuffing knocked out of them to some degree tend to do, that we benchmark achievement as doing better than England at stuff, and as practically everything will show in life, doing better than England at stuff is kind of not good enough for anything. And especially
relatively low bar, yeah.
It is a very low bar. And especially when you're as resource rich as we are, so that's really not a good enough kind of set of, it makes you feel good, I suppose, for that long period where the Scots had the highest unemployment, the worst health rates, the worst inequality. Although, to be honest with you, some of them are still lurking in there for us. But, when we really were bumping along the bottom, and you always expected us, if there was any tally of the UK nations, you knew Scotland would be bottom pretty much. So it took something to kind of get us out of that position. But a big part of how deflated our aspirations have been as a nation is sitting behind the willingness to think that that's good enough. So my own kind of involvement with this, my mother's family came from Caithness. They come from Caithness. My mum's died now about 5 years ago. But the whole family basically thought they were Norse. I had an uncle, a cousin, and a grandfather who were all called Magnus More. And I kind of thought that was normal for everyone to have a Magnus or three in the family. But they're very, very strongly Norse, the Caithnesians, and in fact, a bit of DNA analysis suggests that too.
Pardon my ignorance. Where is Caithness?
God Almighty, Mark! How can you actually put doctor in front of your name and not know where Caithness is? Have a stab.
Okay.
Go on.
On the across from Norway.
Jesus, you're going to have to get out a bit more. Have you ever been where have you been north of?
Basically Scotland. I live in France. I'm from the United States. I've visited Scotland many times, but I don't know the.
Have you been up above Inverness?
A long time ago. Yeah, with my dad.
Well, honestly, lots of interesting places await you then. But Caithness is right at the top of the mainland of Scotland. So
okay, is it near Wick? Is it near Wick?
Yeah, Wick is indeed the stamping ground of my lot. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So
I didn't know where that is. Okay.
Yes, absolutely. So there's Caithness, and that then the Caithnesians famously think they're Norse and sort of, and not Gaelic, for example, though we could go into a large detour on that one. But obviously the Orkneys and Shetland Islands are extremely Norse. They spoke a variety of Norse until kind of the 1600s. If you listen to their accent, you can still hear them being halfway to Norwegian. And so, in that neck of the woods, people definitely regard themselves as having far more Nordic ties. But I think for us, some of us might have Nordic DNA, But it's far more important. I mean, this thing of having affinity with places that have blood connections is, to me, very last season. And without wishing to, kind of poke away at the American connections, we have a great interest in how the United States works, when in many respects, it's a country of, what is it, 240 million people?
It's well over 300 now. I mean,
there you are. So, in size terms, we've got very little in common. And in many of the ways that the States as it operates, there's actually, again, very little in common. Mm-hmm. But because we have people who went there, and because we have people who went to Canada and people who went to New Zealand, we have an automatic way of looking and being interested in the fate of countries that we're in, mm-hmm. basically, because our bloodlines went there. So that has, I think, blinded us to the people who are right beside us, who might actually, and there was a point where they didn't speak English. They now speak English, it's the same, pretty much the same as us. Mm-hmm. But these small countries, which are, cripplingly difficult to visit in terms of how expensive they are, really have a lot to tell us. So that's where my sort of interest in things lay. It was partly because of the old sort of family connections. And eventually I got curious and started to go. And it was then because why would you not want to know more about small countries of 5 million who are topping every league table on the planet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And what did you find? What are some of your explanations for why they, why they top these tables in so many ways? Whereas Scotland, who is, a close cousin, is, is it just because it's is it just because it's been stuck in the UK and this kind of dysfunctional monarchy, or do you have, what are some of the other explanations that might?
Well, I've ended up sort of spending about 10 years of my life on these various questions. I did these 3 films that tried to kind of look at mm-hmm. some of those issues, the Nation films. Mm-hmm. I've also did a PhD that took those 10 years. And
congratulations, by the way. I remember being in touch with you about that.
That's okay, thank you. So, there's a lot's gone into it. But I mean, to cut it really short, what the Norwegians did was they had democracy because they had land ownership. If you look back in time, everything needs a little bit of pulling back to kind of find the origins of stuff. Mm-hmm. And generally speaking, people don't have the patience to look back far enough. But at the same point where Scotland was going feudal, so that basically nobody owned anything, and there was always a feudal superior on your shoulder who would tell you what to do and essentially own you. Yeah. That was not happening in Norway because they just didn't have feudalism. So by the time they got to the 1800s, when they hoped they would be independent, they wrote a constitution that'd be up your street, Mark, and it gave the vote to every man over the age of 25 who owned land. And because so many men owned land in Norway, 45% got the vote overnight.
Wow. Okay.
So that revolutionized Norway. Now, the same clause pretty well in the 1832 Reform Bill Act in Britain enfranchised about 5% of men in the UK and 2.8% in Scotland.
Yeah.
Because of the concentration of land ownership. Mm-hmm. So there's your first throwing 6. We didn't. They threw 6 to start. They had their parliament going from 1814. It was called the Peasants' Parliament, very dismissively. Boy, were those peasants clever. They did all sorts of clever things. They abolished nobility. I think we could have a little round of applause for that. Yeah. They decided that they would not be ruled as a country from Oslo, and that independence meant self-government in their localities, which is why Norway's always been such a very kind of local place, and Scotland has become a very centralized one. And all the things that were part of their democracy, they were the first practically to use proportional representation. They were the second to give women the vote. I mean, all the moves that they made were because they were moving faster through all sorts of big life lessons about democracy than we ever could, because we were stuck within this archaic, backward-facing United Kingdom.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's very revealing. I didn't realize that. And how would you transfer that? I mean, Scotland, obviously has a different history, and you have to go back, several, as you pointed out, you have to go back several hundred years to really get an appreciation of that. do you think how quick? What would be the reforms that you would make, and how quickly do you think they could be done to at least begin to get Scotland, up those tables of happiness and life expectancy and nutrition and this type of thing?
Well, I mean, first of all, obviously we'd have to become independent, because what these countries have, the characteristics they have is equality is incredibly important for them. Even conservative governments of the Nordic countries absolutely have equality and equity really, really high there. So personal taxation is quite high, but you get unbelievable services for that. You have relatively little opting out into private provision, and that enhances kind of solidarity and keeps the group together, as it were. So you need control over all the levers to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's similar in it's similar in France. I mean, it's very big public sector. There's a lot of solidarity. People, you don't mess with your healthcare because you'll be messing with mine, and so it's similar here. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing that's similar is localness. I mean, the French have got almost barking levels of localism with some municipalities that are just 28 people.
36,000 towns in France, and everyone has a mairie and a city council of every size. So
right. Yeah. Well, this is at the polar opposite of Scotland, which has the largest so-called local authorities in the developed world. Wow. So all of the way we are at the moment is basically has got a hidden template called Britain in it. And everything is large. We have large sporting estates. We have enormous councils. We have remoteness. We don't have the experience of hands-on doing stuff yourself unless you get involved in community action. And then you better watch you don't burn yourself out. So that's no use. But, that debate is really hard to get going here because people see that as kind of, it'd be a luxury extra. It's actually the reason that most of these countries do so well is because they're so local that they soak in all the energies of people who are up for it to kind of pour into local areas in a way we just can't do because the structures are all too big and remote. And of course, I would do some proper land reform because that's just a massive blockage on being able to have affordable housing. So all these things suggest we're stuck. If a lot of my connections are in the Highlands, I've just been away off for a wee tourney round for a week, and I'm hearing all the same stuff. As I'm sick of hearing it. My whole adult life, I've been hearing people saying, especially young people, saying they're unable to live where they want to live, which is where they were brought up, which is where they're from. And it's an outrage that we're still sitting 14, 15 years into an SNP government and we have not made enough of a shift in that at all. So all of that is sitting there to be done. It's a big agenda, but it can be done. It has to be done because otherwise there's no reason for us to become independent.
I totally agree. I totally agree with that. And okay. And what do you think? And I've been working with a research group, the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group, for the last several months, and we've actually made some inquiries into EFTA and also to the Nordic Council. And Scotland could join the Nordic Council as an associate member or a observer status like now. They don't have to be an independent member state. And EFTA, as long as the Scottish government has the power to negotiate treaties and the powers to abide by them, which would come with independence, they basically said Scotland would be welcome. What do you think of that scenario of really institutionally connecting Scotland with EFTA, maybe the EU later, that kind of thing? But what would be your view on that?
Well, I was just looking to see, there was a little book that I did with Paddy Board, the late Paddy Board, called Mixed Smorgasbord, which actually goes through the whole EFTA solution in some detail, because the group that I run, Nordic Horizons, held an event after the Brexit vote, and we had people from all the Nordic countries there, including Iceland and Norway, who are two of the key bits of EFTA. Yeah. I mean, for everybody who's kind of not too clued up with all these ones, I mean, fundamentally, the EU is not the only European trade body on the block. And actually, the first one was EFTA. In fact, Britain was a member until 1973. Most of the big European countries were.
Portugal was, I believe. Several were, definitely. Yeah. So,
I mean, EFTA basically, hasn't got aspirations to doing really more than trade. It doesn't want a shared currency. It doesn't want institutions. And so bit by bit, the EU became very different. It began to want to bulk up and have, a more ambitious kind of profile. So people peeled off, including Britain, so ironically. So EFTA was left. It's now basically the Alps and the Nordics. It's got Liechtenstein, Iceland, Norway, and Switzerland. Of those four, this gets awfully complicated. Of those four, three created the EEA, which is the European Economic Area, so that they could basically get a day pass into the EU for single market purposes. Switzerland decided it was so special that it wanted to do bilateral talks and took about 9 years to get to the same place that EFTA had got to, and is currently having all sorts of arguments with the EU. So it's a bit of a cautionary tale about going it alone. So the three of them, anyway, they, let's take Norway. There's a lot of criticism of the EEA. It's often referred to very dismissively in Norway as the Nike deal. Just do it. Because basically you have to abide by all the regulations of the EU, but you have no say in making them. And I think statistically, Norway, which is not a member of the EU, abides by more EU regulations than Sweden, which is a full EU member. So that annoys a lot of Norwegians, but not enough. And there's actually been a political party that for a while looked like it might win the elections next week, simply based on pulling out of the EEA and just saying, do you know something? Brexit, let's do that. But it's sunk back again. So anyway, the point of all of this is that is something that Scotland could think about doing, because the advantage of it is that you're not in the EU customs union, which could help with some of the cross-border issues. You're not required to be in the common agricultural policy or fisheries policy. And so, to an extent, you're trying to just enter and use the single market, but not be part of the institutions. You pay practically the full whack, so you don't get much of a discount, and you get no say in making, in making the rules. But it is a different way to be in the EU, and it might suit Scotland. I mean, that's what the book, if anybody's interested, it's got accounts from all the different countries sort of saying, this is our reason for being where we are with Europe. And nobody's doing it for dogmatic reasons. Britain is the only place that tends to come up with dogmatic reasons for choosing what it wants to do. The rest, let's take Iceland, for example. Iceland is 92% fish, their GDP. So why would they be in the EU? Why would they be in the common fisheries policy? It makes no sense for them. But Finland, which borders Russia, has a great interest in being in the EU. It essentially can't be in NATO because that might be seen as provocative to the Russians. So its foreign policy, for what it's worth, is EU membership. So that's why it's a very keen EU member, and it's in the Euro as well as the EU. But the point is, when you get a whole lot of Nordics in the room, none of them are saying, well, look, here's what you should do because that's what we do. Nobody behaves like that. They say, what's in your interests? And that's like, that's like a mind-blowing question to get, because we don't think like that. Britain teaches you to simply have a stiff, rigid, political, dogmatic, imperialist position on ruling the waves, and then just try to hammer everybody else into it. You never stop to think, and this is what Scotland must do. What is in our best interest to do? That's how we should be governed. But we haven't really had that debate enough. So, there's one that we should start to have.
Sure. And, well, we can start to have it here. What do you, and how do you, let's see, how do we create a debate within Scotland? We have our shows like this, but I mean, how do you, from a people that, I remember visiting Scotland in the early 90s, and I came back, and I just remember people just didn't really debate, because if you went to a pub and you said the wrong thing about politics or sectarianism, you could end up, with a Glasgow kiss or something like that. So I mean, I just remember that time being quite tense. Then I've been back and forth numerous times since the since the referendum, and have seen the debate really open up, at least in the people that I've been talking to. How do you, what do you think is necessary for, the debate to open more broadly among more Scots?
Well, it's a tough one because it's to an extent, it seems like the SNP is kind of closing down a lot of debates.
Yes, I agree with that, and I'd like to get to more about that a little later. But please continue.
They seem to be, unfortunately, they're not a naturally discursive bunch of people. Let's say the SNP leadership, if they don't actually encourage much of a debate within their own party conference, and they don't, then there's no way that any important initiatives will be taken by them, basically, to stimulate a sort of wider debate. So I think the thing is, I'm a great believer in timing. It's hard for people that are volunteers, and I should say again here that everybody, everyone watching, that everybody involved in this is a volunteer. And I was just thinking, especially Independence Live, Paul McCartney, that's modestly behind the scenes here, and no, not that wingsy one, and Mark, but Indie Live, these guys are unbelievable. And when I think a lot of the time about people sort of saying, well, what's special about the Yes side, it's people like Indie Live who just take this here about building the Scottish state. These guys, I remember Kevin Givney and the crew right at the beginning, sort of dodgily trying to kind of get their little iPhones, lined up for the first events around the Indie Ref. Look what they're doing now.
I know.
I mean, they've shouldered this burden with no support from the SNP, no particular support from any of the other pro-independence parties. On practically a shoestring, they are producing civic society broadcasting. I mean, of course, it's independence leaning, but these guys used to come and broadcast Nordic Horizons as well.
Sure.
So that anything that's about the civic future of Scotland, why is the institutional clout that sits behind No not interested in that?
Yeah,
why does No have no interest? And none of the get up and go, none of the activism. If you look at the practical people in Scotland, in my experience, they're overwhelmingly yes voters, because the kind of people who are prepared to throw themselves a little bit under the wheels to get this place changed and put themselves in the line, they tend to be people who want to have control in the hands of Scots. So I sort of went off the point somewhat there, but yes, I mean, if we were to think when we get a campaign, because I think at the moment it's great that folk are on here watching tonight. God love you, right? But when you've got a campaign coming, that sort of transforms what might be, just vaguely interesting stuff into much more central issues. Do we want a monarchy? Do we want to be part of the EU? Have we discussed what EFTA membership might bring? We have to, once we're doing that, I would like to see Indie Live being back to the hilt and having a massive fundraiser to be pushing this kind of stuff as a proper debate, and to essentially be almost doing a broadcast channel. I mean, there are enough of us old, rejected broadcasters around the place that could certainly volunteer our services.
Oh, absolutely.
And a whole load of youngsters that it would also, once we have the campaign timing for it, there's an awful lot of young people that, I'd be very happy to sort of do any kind of coaching that's necessary to bring on a team of broadcasters. So that's one thing we could do. We need a lot of publicity, but there's only a point in doing that when the door is sort of starting to creep open and you've got a bit of a time scale and it's game on again, because otherwise it hasn't got quite the compelling sort of narrative behind it that would be needed to get people tuning in.
Yeah, because that's another thing regarding as you say, the timing of the referendum, and I'm sure you're aware of it too. Within the Yes movement, there is a increasing concern over for example, you were mentioning the lack of debate. I know some people in the, I know one or two members of the NAC, and they said that they wanted to debate whether or not at conference they would debate on a measure of what the metrics would be for determining when the pandemic is over, so that they could have the referendum. They didn't allow for a debate. Nicola Sturgeon said in the last couple of days that she wants to have it within the first half of this parliament. But right after Boris Johnson said he wasn't going to allow one, or and so there's this whole thing of depending on the British government to give permission, whereas a lot of people are like, look, we're sovereign, we're Scots, we should just go. How do you fall down on that? And I mean, in my view, the whole idea of depending on a Section 30 is problematic at best. And if there's a court challenge and it goes to the Supreme Court and they say, no, you can't, that could be really problematic. So I'm just trying to explore with you how you see that debate, and then maybe what other alternatives may be to a Section 31, which I have some suggestions, but I'd like to hear your view on it.
Well, I mean, you can expend a lot of energy trying to tell Nicola Sturgeon what she should do. Mm-hmm. And she's not listening to any of this, right? So, I mean, in life, generally speaking, I try to conserve my energy for the areas that are likely to have some impact. I'm not given to an awful lot of speculation because I'm pretty sure there will be a move towards having an independence referendum before 2023, because otherwise, Nicola, it's not exactly toast, but she's got huge political problems. Yeah. However, what seems to me to matter more is the kind of choreography a bit of this, because we're not sure what we're cruising into here. It seems pretty important that there is a request for a Section 30 made, because it has to be refused for us to have clarity about where we stand, that the British government will not even let us have our own referendum. For eventually, if we're going to talk about backstops, the following general election to then potentially be one which is simply fought on independence. But if we haven't asked for a Section 30, we don't make it that kind of election. And that's been happening over and over again because there's been no Section 30 request. So each election, whether it's Scottish Parliament or Westminster, has just become another sort of, beauty contest between parties. We need to now up the ante and turn the next Westminster election, if we get the runaround. It has to become a different election. It has to become the one that is a de facto independence referendum. And you only do that if you've asked for a Section 30 and been refused. So to me, rather than have long conversations about will it be in 2022, will it be in November, will it be in May, will it be in whatever, the important thing is that we have to have asked and been knocked back is one thing. The next thing would be there's a worry that basically talking about 2023, which is what I hear now. I'm also hearing, in fact, I wrote this column more than a year ago, that Boris Johnson will end up trying to go for an early general election. I mean, This is like a guy who's kind of tottering along, lost his balance completely, and needs to have he hasn't got a long run in him, Boris, until he falls flat in his face. So it's very likely, I think, that he'll be looking to try and cut and go early to basically get rid of the legislation that requires the Fixed Parliaments Act, so that he's able to cut this term short and use COVID and whatever else as an excuse. And 2023 might well be his date for going. So, we'll end up with a guy messy 2023 if we have May 2023 suddenly bagged by Boris. And we've seen from how he works with social care that he does stuff, he just does stuff suddenly. So he could well decide fairly quickly to go for that. And if that's been the kind of date, Nicola's the opposite. She keeps all her cards. Well, actually, maybe I'm contradicting myself. He keeps his cards close to his chest. But I think she takes a longer time to make her mind up. Boris will make his mind and work very quickly on something. And if Nicola prevaricates, that date will be gone. So we will have lost the initiative and we'll have lost a general election we could have used for something else if we haven't already asked for a Section 30 and gone through whatever we need to go through to be able to get either our own referendum or to get completely knocked back. So that's my main thing, is that we cannot let the next general election just be another election. And we have to now get some kind of motor going and strategy, which you'd like to think would be what is announced at the SNP conference that starts tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I certainly agree with that, but to a certain extent, even if there is, let's imagine there is one held in 2023, and then there'll be some kind of 18-month, 2-year transition period. That's like 4 years before we get independent, before Scotland gets independence. In the meantime, Brexit bites harder. Food shortages, who knows, medicine shortages. The stuff that the UK government is doing, with the Northern Ireland, protocol, and now with the migrants, against the French. I mean, that's 4 years until Scotland even begins to emerge from that. And the view of our group I've been working with, why not just dissolve the Treaty of Union? I mean, here's bear with me. If the Treaty of Union is a bilateral treaty, okay, and so you have the English side and the Scottish side, basically, and so if the Scottish representatives in Westminster, if the Scottish MPs vote to withdraw from their part of the treaty, wouldn't that dissolve the treaty? I mean, there's no written constitution in Westminster, so that nothing is put down. But that's something.
And how would that vote be done?
Among the Scottish MPs as party to the Scottish part of the treaty. That it would depend on them coordinating, but we're looking into that to see whether that's a feasible option.
Does that feel enough? My thing is, right, we have to because we will have independence, I'm certain of that. We need to think over that moment, because it's a process. And when you start to look at the way that other countries, take Norway. There's all sorts of theoretical academics have spent time looking at Norway's progress into becoming an independent country, and they isolate 3 periods of nation building, 2 before it became independent and 1 after it, so that nation building never stops. And we can't.
I agree.
End up,
I completely agree.
Nation building. Just to make this point, that's nation building in a country that voted 230,000 for independence in 1905. 184 against. Wow. It was 98%. Everybody wanted independence. Okay. And still, nation building was a massive, massive project. That won't be any different from us. And every time you do something that looks like it's kind of cutting corners with not with Westminster, because its popularity, the latest poll suggests it's as unpopular as ever. But when it looks like you're cutting corners with your own electorate, I think that causes you problems later down the line.
Yes, but that gets me to the second component of that, where Scotland does engage in the nation building, drafting, refining and drafting and refining a constitution, planning out a central bank, currency, all that could conceivably start after Scotland withdraws from the Treaty of Union, subject at the end like that to a confirmatory referendum. Not to say that there doesn't need to be the imprimatur of democratic legitimacy on it. It's just that the problem is that I saw in 2014 was that they were saying it was a leap in the dark for too many, and that's why that's why Scots voted no. There wasn't enough information. I remember about what.
I know, but Mark, this is the real problem with it. And honestly, I've spent as long as anybody else trying to map out what the future of Scotland might be. But sure. This is, I doubtless I'll get pelters for this. But the irritating truth about the situation is that the huge popularity of Nicola Sturgeon across both yes and no camps, across the whole of Britain. And actually, I've watched this, I've watched her speaking at the Arctic Circle conference in Reykjavik. There was a queue out the door to meet her. Mm-hmm. She was there, and the other keynote speaker was Ban Ki-moon, who was the UN Secretary General. Nobody was waiting to speak to him. Mm-hmm. So the thing is, whether you rate her or otherwise as a politician, as a sort of leader figure within Scotland, she has a lot of clout. Now, I think the problem is, she is the one who will determine the pace of when we go for the second independence referendum, and attempts to try to kind of, there's actually no real way to try and force her hand. The SNP conference, SNP members have not proved able to do that and to have any kind of purchase within the SNP. Alba absolutely, they're within their rights to make criticisms and alternatives, and perhaps they have actually forced the pace. It's hard to know. But it's her that's running the race, and everybody else who's trying to sort of get themselves battle ready is like me going into training for a marathon when it's you that's actually running the race. Mm-hmm. She is the one who's going to put her, who's going to hit the go button. And we are stuck with that reality. And to my mind, we need to get the rest of us, the Yes movement, as ready as we can be for that, because I think it will happen. But it's very difficult for you to say that you and anybody else, and even the MP cohort, are a very controlled by Nicola Sturgeon set of people. I would have to say, many of them.
Yeah.
Who the hell are you? Who are you to decide? That's what people will feel. It's just not clear. And I think the Scots are tediously law-abiding. I mean, I was brought up in Belfast, and a lot of my, connections are within Ireland, who used to be more law-abiding, but never as blooming law-abiding as the Scots. So I think there's a real worry about how you go about things here, and dashing for the line in ways that people don't feel include everyone and ticks all the boxes. Right? I know a lot of people will find that very irritating because they want to be independent yesterday. But if you there's a grabbiness that is built into powerlessness. You don't believe that opportunities will last for long. And I'm not suggesting that there is an endless opportunity for independence, but I'm certain as well that it's not going to go like snow off a dike. It's something that is, if it's there and it's in people's minds and they're open to the idea that the Scottish government is a better, calmer, more progressive way to run this country than the UK government, that insight in voters does not disappear just because we don't get independence yesterday. I think we just have to be more confident that we can make a good argument. But I quite understand why people are getting really worried.
Yeah, I sympathize with that, but at the same time, I remember back in 2013, 2014, my elderly uncle, I was asking about independence, and he was just like, "How much? I want to ask Alex Salmon how much it's going to cost me exactly," and so what I felt was back then there was just a lack of specifics about what independence would entail. And there was a lack of an ability. They didn't want to talk about the monarchy. They didn't want to rock the boat. We'll keep the monarchy for a while. And what about the currency? What about all this? And these were questions that people, that people had in their minds that arguably led to a no vote. So what I'm trying to get at is how do we, and I interviewed Kenny McCaskill a few weeks back, and he was saying that they're just not ready for a referendum, and the Scottish government is not prepared for a referendum. And so when he, assuming they call a
right, okay. So Mark, let's just take that very point, because I wouldn't disagree with that. I don't see a lot of evidence of massive forward planning, and it annoys the hell out of me. No. But how do you cope with that? How do you cope with the fact there is a government, a Scottish government, and if we're going towards independence, it will be in the driving seat, and it is not current. If that's true, it's not currently ready to roll. What do we do about that? Do we just move forward in the hope that it'll all be all right on the night? I'm not sure, because this point about being law-abiding, I don't mean that the Scots are conservative in that respect. And it's interesting that I see from some of the comments, that's the automatic thought. Law-abidingness is basically conservatism. I think that people have such a strong belief in democratic ways of doing things that they want it done, if you like, they want it done right. That's my biggest beef with the SNP, that they need to keep expanding the idea of democracy powerfully, to carry everybody along with us. And I don't think they do. But I'm not sure how easy it is for any other non-elected group without a majority of support to jump the crow. That's all.
Okay, I wouldn't put it that way. I would put it we're seeking alternative routes to it, but we'll leave. But my main point was that.
And I'm seeing just another one there about so the Tories just went ahead with Brexit. Well, great. So does that justify us going, yeah, fuck it, let's just go for independence? We're not prepared. we could have some difficulties. We will have difficulties.
Mhm.
There is no country on earth that's become independent, certainly not our neighbours from the time I've put into looking at it, who haven't had difficulties. Now, that's okay. But these countries have to keep saying this. 98% support for independence in Norway, roughly 95% in Iceland.
And what can
they
you
were
say about
all ready to roll. The whole of that civic society was ready to roll, and they had much, much more powerful devolution. So they're already raising their own taxes.
Mhm.
So all I'm saying is just, that you can look at it strikes me many times that if the Scots were temperamentally like the average cross-section of the English electorate, we would have been absolutely independent in 2014 because nobody would have thought particularly worried about anything, really. And maybe it's all right on the night, and a profound belief in a dogma is enough to get English voters voting in ways that are very self-harming.
Mhm.
But this is my point. I think the Scottish electorate is different. It doesn't vote like that. That's part of the reason it didn't vote for Brexit. Not because it thought the EU was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I don't think that was it. They just thought, on balance, we're going to have to trade with the EU. We don't have a problem with European people. We don't have a problem with being governed or, have some adjudication with the European Court of Justice. That doesn't kind of hurt us to our core. The things that seem to be absolutely wounding to the English psyche just glance off the Scots, right? So there's a different thing going on there. And I just think we have to marry the way we approach people with the kind of vibe that is sitting in the bit of the population that we could possibly win. I'm not interested, and absolutely we worry too much about people who will never vote yes. We don't need everybody to vote yes. That's okay. But there's a big clump in the middle who just need to see one example of what they think looks like, the bid to win them over has now been abandoned to really feel panicked. I'm afraid the Scots seem to be easily panicked. Not everybody, but a chunk in the middle. My mother was one. My mother voted no.
I know the type, certainly. It's just that I feel as if as we go towards whenever the referendum may be, I don't know how clear they will be able to be with planning. I know that they said that they'll be coming out with a detailed prospectus of what independence would look like. But I'm just wondering how clear can they be, and how much can we count on, if we do vote that way, that's what will emerge? Will it just be like another manifesto, or how much faith can we put in the prospectus? And because for me, the worst thing would be if Scotland, and you making this point earlier, that Scotland becomes independent, but the way that the state is built after that, because there was not this clarity, it wasn't a binding thing of, okay, if we vote for that, then Scotland will be like this. There wasn't that, and I don't know if there can be here. But if Scotland was to be constructed in a way that was just more like, the UK, or just kind of more just another corporate oligarchy, it would have been just a waste. So I'm just wondering what your views are how, because I had a question.
Mark, I don't think you can lock these changes in. I mean, absolutely, I would be disappointed to think that the first period of independence was spent just sort of in the same sort of idling area where we think we're doing okay because we can kind of, because we're doing a couple of percentage points better at England than England at stuff. And actually, we very possibly won't. All the countries that have become independent have had a period of turmoil. So it is very likely that there will be that. And then you have to have a confidence in leadership. It's like going off on a boat journey where there's at the moment only one captain that thinks that journey is even possible. This is also why I think, although there will be new parties, and I would certainly be interested in that after we get to that stage, it's very likely a lot of people will still put their trust, if we've got in Nicola Sturgeon, if she's still up for it, and the SNP, because they're the only captains who expected to get to the other end and steer just through the narrows. So, I mean, the idea that the SNP will naturally just fade away, I don't think there's very much evidence in history for that happening. And if they get to the stage of independence, they will have a lot of clout. So You can get very hot and bothered about the things that should happen that probably won't happen. I don't think they'll have a proper discussion about whether it's the EU or EFTA. I don't think they'll open up the debate about whether or not we want a head of state. They'll make a decision about it, and it'll be presented as a fait accompli. That's the way they rock, because the SNP is a British party. I mean, every political party here, if people have not spent time living in other countries, they cannot but be very British in their heads. So, it's very difficult to see how you get very quick, massive movement. And whilst we're talking about independence, something that can and will inevitably put us on a different path, I'm sure that's where Scotland is destined to go. At the very beginning, I don't think it'll be, as kind of meteoric and quick a change as many of us want.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's go to a few of the questions here from the. Do you think we need independence by next summer? Well, our conversation is born that has sort of answered that. But just the urgency of it, whether we still have industries or a parliament left. I mean, is a deep concern that the British government will continue to undermine devolution further, and that the economic damage will be worse and worse. And that Scotland, just basically the contention, Scotland can't wait at least 4 years to become independent.
Well, yes, I mean, clearly. But I mean, it's an awkward situation because all of that is absolutely true, as many things in life are, that there's an urgency with something, and yet it needs a lot of skill to be able to grasp the opportunity without, to quote Burns, what is that? You grasp the flower, its bloom is shed. You need to do this carefully, because we get one good opportunity to do this, and how we move towards independence will very much condition how successful it is. It's not grabby. Even with the more urgent it becomes, don't grab, right? Because what will get us out of this is not grabby. Grabbiness is British. Grabbiness is Boris thinking he can claim to be the kind of successor. How dare he actually, the successor to Clement Attlee and Nye Bevan, simply because he's putting more money into the NHS in the name of fixing social care. I mean, all of that kind of, I thought of it in the back of a fag packet, and it worked for me, approach to politics is what we're used to, and we're responding in kind a lot of the time. The reason we would want to have a different way of governing ourselves is to have consensus, all this boring stuff. It's not light, sparks and fire. Some of it is, but it's much more consensual, planned and sensible, right? So, everything has got to be like that. And I do absolutely understand the urgency. I would quite like, for example, personally speaking, I would quite like my life back a bit, because it's been a long time sitting. And I know everybody that's watching this, and particularly the Independence Live guys, are like this. Their lives disappeared. In 2013, they moved into a cause. We all saw something so powerful, so massively transformational in its potential. Then the experience of the NDREF was almost a religious one for a lot of people, because it connected us with such a powerful set of beliefs.
I totally agree.
All of that has been going on now for, 7
years? A decade. I mean, since
pretty much.
No,
that's a long haul. And, an awful lot of people are, some of the impatience is not, and I'm not saying impatience like that's a childish thing or a wrong reaction, but it's because people are actually so devoted to wanting to see this thing done that they can't stand the thought that it might take longer, because it has to happen soon for all sorts of reasons. And yet, just in weaving our way through the obstacles that are in front of us, it has to happen at its own speed, I think, because I think it will succeed. If I didn't believe that, then okay, I'd probably feel pretty grabby as well. But so of course we need to get going. And I think probably the bit that concerns me is that we haven't really managed to pull the Yes movement together. If anything, the recent developments with party political divisions have meant that the Yes movement has become more faltering in some respects than it's been before.
I do agree with that to a certain extent. I don't think that the formation of the ALBA party and all that has made anybody less devoted to it. But there's no question the movement has been divided, and the SNP has certainly its role to play in that as well as ALBA. But there are reasons that ALBA was formed. It wasn't just out of the blue.
Yeah,
and
so, I appreciate that, and I'm not trying to get into that.
Sure.
What I'm meaning is that there are plenty of issues that could be and should be being expanded and debated. There's lots of different small groups that are doing it, and it's kind of frustrating because it feels like if we actually could bring everyone together, fundraise one big thing, and create one big platform, we might make a bit more of an impression. I mean, the piece that I wrote in The National today was pretty much criticizing the SNP for not making a really powerful, passionate statement within that debate about Boris Johnson's social care stuff. Okay, one of the points that Ian Blackford has said is, don't put your mitts on our Scottish NHS. I mean, to be honest with you, okay, that's important. Whose money, who has authority over money that's spent on devolved issues, that matters. But surely to God, the bigger issue is if you want a properly funded and run state, public, National Health Service and social care service, who believes that will happen ever in your lifetime without an independent Scotland?
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
And I think that's
my point is simply, why was that point not made?
Yeah, but I think that comes also out of some of the frustration comes out of, for example, Ian Blackford saying how many times, Scotland will never be taken out of the EU against their will. They were. And so there's just been this kind of in addition to the mandates that have been continually given, we're still waiting. But there's a real frustration.
My question is, one thing I just can't personally abide is sort of just repeating, as it were, the litany of failures of something, because it actually increases your powerlessness as you chuck, the pelters around. I'm very, very, cautious about throwing pelters around because for that very reason, I actually think it's a great source of lost authority. And we have to kind of fix our own stuff. So it's obvious the SNP is just not taking the opportunities that are sitting there like gifts to try to expand the wider point about why you'd want independence. And it's maddening. But I mean, my blood pressure doesn't cope with doing maddening, really. And so to me, of course, I've written a column making all the points there. And, that's what I'm employed to do. But the better possibility would be trying to find some sort of way to get these points made in ways that don't require me to try to find a way to stick my hand up Nicola Sturgeon's back like a puppet, because she ain't got a puppet slot, right?
Yeah, right.
So,
Gotcha.
There's no point. There's no point in wasting your energy on that. That's what I mean about, I wish we had something, and there's so many splintered different groups who all had the ambition at the point of origin to be that vehicle. And yet not one has kind of got enough clout really to be able to sort of act as a substitute. And maybe there can't be, maybe that's a point.
Okay. All right. We'll get to a few more questions in the remaining time. The second one, I think this goes back to what you were saying about people not being able to live in the place that they because of the land. But I can relate to what you're saying. I'm 34 and I had to move away from Millport when I was 16 due to not being able to get any kind of council housing. I've just been given a house back home and no one remembers who I am, but I'm petrified this universal credit thing is going to screw me over. So I'm praying the island bond actually happens because I would be eligible for it. So I'm not exactly clear on everything, but
the island bond was an idea to try to kind of boost some of the powers of the island authorities. I'm not sure how quickly that's going to come in, John Paul, but I hope it is fast enough. And yes, I mean, the universal credit thing is appalling, and of course tucked into the horrible cocktail of yuck that the Tories have come up with this week. But it's an appalling thing that actually it costs so much more to live on islands. and I'm so sorry that you've had such a long kind of journey to manage to get back to the beginning again. Maybe that's another thing that we need to sort of strategize about is, what are we going to do? What do we think the Scottish government could do or can do about the universal credit £20 loss? I mean, it would be a tremendously powerful thing to say that we will mitigate that Scotland thinks that is such an appalling thing to do that we will find a way to mitigate it. And I would love to hear more push on that, because I think that some of these actions would be the most powerful statement about independence you could possibly make.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. And I was hearing listening to another show earlier today, and they made the point that they did mitigate the bedroom tax. Why can't they mitigate this? And so that was another point. But I wanted to get to this. We were talking about the EFTA and the EU. And you were kind of giving out different options and different, kind of drawbacks and advantages. But what would you prefer? I mean, if you were to decide, do we go in EFTA first and then go into the EU, or go into EFTA and maybe Scotland will be comfortable with that, and they may not decide not to go into the EU. What do you think is the best option, at least in the short term?
Well, The EFTA option does look quite attractive. The thing would be that at least two of the EFTA countries, Norway and Iceland, have got a much higher profile of fishing within their GDP than we do. And whilst we have, we know how a lot of public opinion was pushed by the fishermen's view on Brexit, although not steamrollered in Scotland. And that actually perhaps says something about the small nature now these days of the fishing community within Scotland. So getting back to that, things about what's in our best interests, I don't think we match to some degree the kind of profile of the two neighbours that we have and their motivations for wanting to be in EFTA. I don't know, and I would need to have a little bit more of a look as to how much not being in the EU customs union helps us with the border issue.
I wanted to get to that, because we've been doing quite a bit of research on that, and I don't think that it's true that being in EFTA and being in the EEA does not automatically confer being in the customs union. But I'm not sure it's not possible to be in EFTA and the customs union as well, because there are states like Andorra, Monaco, and others.
There's no point. If you're going to be in the EU customs union, why aren't you just in the EU?
Well, at least in the short.
The point would be the exact opposite. It would be that arguably not being subject to EU customs, the customs union, might make the transition with the English border easier. So the only reason that you would be going for EFTA membership would be to try to slip the customs union, which you can do via EFTA. The other side of it, I mean, there may be a point where we just have to bite the bullet on this one. Of course, it depends whether or not people feel we'll get in and we don't need to move immediately to join the euro. The Swedish haven't done that, but there might be more heat on a new member. It's hard to say. There is this, fact that 62% of people did vote to be EU members. Now, of course, they didn't have a choice. So actually, if they had a choice, they might think differently. But they might have again, much will depend on political leadership. They might have the feeling that the acme of success for us is to walk back in where the British, let's face it, the English walked out. And what I'd really like to see actually is a bidding war. I would like to see EU and EFTA, because what that does before the next referendum, and that's why I was involved in the group EuropeForScotland.com, who were people from all sorts of nations. I mean, astonishing, lots of very prominent English people as well, calling on the EU to sort of basically get off their bahookies and make it clear to the Scots that they would be welcomed back in before the British start trying to kind of, poison the well the next time. And the thing that would do is also prompt EFTA to kind of get their act together. I mean, we're a tasty blooming catch.
I know.
What Scots need to get is how tasty we are, because at the moment, the feeling that's generated very easily by London is who would have you.
Yeah, no, I agree. But as I said, we talked to EFTA. I talked to a very high member of there, and basically, because I put it in the context of if the Holyrood elections in May were plebiscitary. In other words, if you voted for it, that you become independent, basically. And so I asked him, this was back in February, the Secretariat in Brussels, okay, if Scotland did consider this a plebiscitary, could Scotland join EFTA? And he basically said, yeah, if all you'd have to do is once
but Mark, look,
let me finish my point.
It's completely irrelevant. I'm sorry, because EFTA, like anything else, is governed by the states, the member states.
Yeah.
And, you know, people like Norway, I mean, the last time around, I think a lot of people were very disappointed that Norway didn't come out for Scotland, that basically they didn't see that we were kind of the Norway to England's Sweden, and that history was repeating itself. They didn't come out because countries will not do that. They will not make ahead of time commitments until a country has got out and clear. In fact, ironically, Britain was the first country to recognize Norwegian independence. Yeah. But, you know, the Secretariat in Brussels can say whatever they like. We also can't be an observer within the Nordic Council. That's not something that devolved parts of countries can do. Otherwise, all the members of Germany would be in there.
Yes, it is.
Mark, I'm sorry, we'll have to agree to disagree on this.
Okay, that's fine. It's just that I have it on good authority. I've talked to people.
I'm sure you do, Mark. I've been trying to get this done for 10 years with a bunch of, you know, Nordic professors with very good standing within their countries. Sure. And it seems we can't do that. But anyway, the point is not what we can manage to force through now and whatever. We will be a very attractive proposition for the Nordic Council when we're independent. And we can't expect a lot of support from these countries in the run up to it because they don't do that. So, you know, we need to not expect that these kind of handholds and these kind of lifeboats are available. We have to do this on our own, knowing simply that we are so tasty a catch that we will be very attractive to any trade body and to the Nordic Council. It would be nice if we could get a bit of a bidding war going, but despite the best efforts of this group, there's been not a squeak from the EU about it. Yeah. So I suspect that this is the reality of it. Every country's the same. They will not touch you till you've got there yourselves, till you've fought for it. Till you've got yourselves organized and not think that there's this hand up really coming from anywhere else. And that's okay. I'm up for it.
Okay. All right. Well, on that note, I'm sorry we couldn't get all the questions, but it's always good to, you know, have a really good discussion, even if we don't agree on everything. And I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for being with us. Is there anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
Yes. If anybody's up for it, there's a debate in the Queen's Hall in Edinburgh on the 21st of September. Oop, there we are, as if by magic. And it should be a really good night. I mean, that's me waxing lyrical, but you get the chance to hear 6 different people from very different parts of the Yes movement there with some great music. And Andy Patterson, who did the 3,000 Trees play that was big at the Edinburgh Festival in 2019, he's written a new little political satire on where we are now. So it should be a great night. And if you'd like to come, that would be fantastic. The Edinburgh Yes Hub have, as usual, pushed their necks out and paid for everything in advance. So it would be nice to get that support for that gig. And I think it'll be live streamed as well. Okay. On that note, thank you very much, Lesley, for being with us, and look forward to having you back again in the near future. Right, Char. Thanks very much. No problem. My pleasure.